So these guys are they're all sort of late 60s. And
what is that?
each other the line is growing.
Must be nice for the
Do you know what I mean?
The microscopes over there,
What did you
I've seen that. It's like the street, you know, because I mean, I think my it's really nice.
They're getting pretty good now.
Last night yeah, I've been up to 100.
Because it's my book.
That's right.
Not very long, is it? I just so when it goes late. I think it was 2 months.
Yes.
She did 2. Give someone 2.
Yeah, she sort of got concentrated on
There's a lot of speakers sort of that time slot.
I think so.
It's
So
all
I'm
nice.
heading that chair.
Have you got
Did you say you're right? Oh yeah, when you go back to him.
Well, that's what I've just written.
That's my one.
Yeah. And I've got another job.
What's it going to be called?
I want to call it the hub.
Put a year at the top of the page.
It's my story. And both of their fortunes sort of flipped upside down. Things found with capital Russia, but off Barnes, for a partner in Norwegians. So it's kind of that displacement.
I like this.
But kind of a couple of years around.
It's about my mother's He must have taken a whistle.
I've got my whistle with me. I usually have one of those little dog whistles.
Right, I'm really happy to be introducing Tim Saunders because we used to belong to the same little poetry group. There were three of us, and Tim's poems are really awesome, which you'll see soon. And I always used to say, like, oh, I had to ask you what grew up in famous. So now he's famous because he's been on Country Calendar, he's won lots of competitions and things. So I feel really honoured to be doing this.
Have you got his autograph?
Huh?
Have you got his autograph?
No, I'll get you after.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we just had to do a few health and safety things first of all. I guess most of you would have been here, but toilets are on the left-hand side, going up the left-hand side of the library. There's two green doors. You'll see the green in the middle. There's books for sale at the counter, and Tim's book is one of them. And if you need a face mask, they are just on that little blue cube there. What else is there? Oh, exits in case there's a fire or anything like that. Just straight where you came in, just be, yeah, that way. And I think that's about it. So, Tim.
Right. Well, I'll start with a poem. This is called Donor. We stand in cattle yards under the macrocarpa, wrecked in the Wahine storm, wave at a couple of cyclists, potential organ donors, you say, and we laugh like plovers while over the ranges the last slice of the moon casts a shadow on your liver. It's just a wee short poem I wrote just a couple of years ago, and it was actually published as flash fiction. It was published in Flash Frontier, part of their flash fiction, National Flash Fiction Awards actually, and it was shortlisted in their micro section, which has to be a story under 100 words. That clocks in at 49, and most of it is actually true. When I wrote this, I was standing in cattle yards under a macrocarpa that was wrecked in the Wahine storm. A couple of cyclists did go past, and they waved, and the guy I was with did say I was a couple of potential organ donors. The rest of it was just something I had in my notebook, because that's how it worked. I carry a notebook wherever I go on the farm, and then just write down little lines here, little paragraphs, stanzas, anything that pops into my head. Then I act like a magpie later, and I just take little bits here and there, and that's how I construct things. So anyway, yes, I'm Tim Saunders, and this is my book, This Farming Life. Now, 5 generations on a New Zealand farm. Has anybody read it at all? So a few people that might have read it.
You just saw it on the calendar.
Saw it on Country Calendar. So you saw Country Calendar. Anybody else see Country Calendar? Right. 7 Sharp. Anyone seen me on 7 Sharp as well? Oh, good. Excellent.
It's famous.
Yeah. 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 I'll sign your books after. I'll sign anything as long as it's not a check.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, so this is actually where it all started for me here at Fielding Library, because 2016, I brought this along. I don't know if you probably can't read this, but I'll read it out to you. It says Fielding Library Writers' Prize 2016. Now in 2016, the Fielding Library ran a short story competition, and I won it. I entered that and I won it, and that was the first time I've ever won a short story competition or anything like that. So that's 4 years ago I did that, and yeah, and it was a story called Last Christmas. It was about a family gathered around at Christmas time and dealing with a few different issues and things like that. And it's still one of my favourite stories that I've ever written. And I've rewritten it several times as I've learned better writing style as I've gone along. I've added to it, taken things away, changed things. Now that story, when it was published around here in the library and in the newspaper and things like that, a lot of people liked the characters. The main character was Dad, and that was based on my own father and myself. And that's how I work. I usually base a character on the people I know and just tweak them a little bit, because you don't want to know that you've written that. But people did recognise that in my family. It was the first time my family had read anything that I'd ever written. And I actually remember I was down the back paddock. We were shifting sheep, and I got the phone call from the library to say, "You've won this competition." And I said to Dad, "Dad, won the short story competition." And he goes, "Brilliant news, son. Now let's get these sheep shifted." So that's pretty much how we are as a family.
That was on just a few weeks ago, wasn't it, on Country Calendar?
Yes, Country Calendar was 2 weeks ago. Yeah. So I'll tell you some stories about that, because that was quite an experience. But that first story taught me a lot about dialogue. Taught me how to write dialogue, because I listen to how people speak, and I like to mimic people when they're speaking, and I find myself doing that. It's incredibly rude, but I do mimic them when they're speaking, and that gets it into my head, and that way I can write dialogue better. Much more fun than writing my own dialogue. But that's the only way really to write dialogue, and you'll find that in this book is my love of mimicking people and the way they talk. Much to Dad's concern, he doesn't like that. He didn't like reading himself the first time. Didn't really, yeah. He's used to it now. He's read it.
Does it start from like when your parents went on that?
Yeah. So this is, I'll get into this very shortly, but yeah, this is my life on my sheep and beef farm here in Manawatu. And winning that competition was an incredible boost to my confidence in writing. I've written all my life, and before that, I've never had any success with it. But that gave me, the library here gave me that little boost. My nana, my dad's mother, she lived next to us on the farm, and she used to read to me all the time. When I was so big, not that much smaller to what I am now, but when I was that big, she would read to me, and Mum and Dad would never know where I was. I remember them getting very worried about me, but they eventually realised that I was always over at Nana's, and she was always reading to me. And it was that love of books that she put into me, that she instilled, this love of books, that led to my writing. Now, the other big influence was my grandfather, which was my mum's father. Now, he came from England. Mum was born in England. But Grandpa he was actually a designer of the Spitfire, one of the original design team, which was his claim to fame. And I remember going over there a few years ago, going to England, and there was a big Spitfire museum, a Supermarine museum in Southampton. And I went to the man at the counter and I said, "Oh, my grandfather." He said, "Oh, you're from the colonies, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Oh, you're Mum." I said, "My grandfather was, he was a designer of the Spitfire." He said, "Oh," with this big beak of a nose. He said, "Well, if I had a penny for every person that came in here and said that, I'd be a very rich man." And I said, "No. He said, "Well, if it's true, his name will be in this book." And he reached under the counter and gets this big dusty book out and flipped it over, and here on the first page was Dudley Morris, my grandfather. I went over a couple of pages, and here's my grandmother as well. I didn't know I'd worked there. So Grandpa, he wrote a lot about the Spitfire, and he wrote some memoirs, which when I went to England, I followed all the places he'd been in his life. And he was always very interested in my writing, because I was always writing little stories, little poems and stuff. And between Grandpa and Nana, that's where my love of story writing really encouraged. I've never taken a formal lesson or anything like that. I've always, my favourite thing is reading. And when I read, I like to take the story to pieces. Much like some people will take an engine to pieces and get all the little bits laid out on the floor. I do that with stories, so that's how I know how things tick and how things work. And I think that is a nice way of learning the craft, really. So, at the Writers' Festival, I won the competition here. When I got my prize, the lady said, and I don't think she works here anymore, I haven't seen her, but the lady said, next year we're having a Writers' Festival, 2017. I said, well, that sounds interesting. Here in the Manawatu, a Writers' Festival, that's pretty exciting. So I kept an eye out for that. And now the Writers' Festival was organised by Rachel Doré. I just thought she just had to leave. And she put out a book of poems to go with that Writers' Festival. Now that was the first time I got to see my poetry printed. And that's pretty exciting. That's a very exciting place to be, is to actually see something written. So these events like this are really good for encouraging people. I'll read you one of them. This is Moving to Town. Clouds hang half-mast on the Tararuas today. We're taking Dad to town tomorrow to be closer to Mum. And the cluster of sheds and tractors remain to remind us of shouts like fists to the jaw, and more tall stories than you can shake a tote or a stick at. Truth hides in the lie of the land, and the kinds of sins kids forgive unforgiving fathers for are swept to the side. Dad's moving to town tomorrow to be closer to Mum. So that was one of the first poems that I ever wrote. I had two in here, flat out to full stop. They came, they saw, they conked out in an old Holden ute by the Orua at Menzies Ford. From flat out to full stop in 5 seconds. For a while they floundered in fielding like fish after the 04 flood. Last I heard, one of them was dead from drugs, the other in jail for arson and theft. But the ute they left remains, rust bucket bomb reclaimed by fern and moss, and the river carries their cross. The Orua has its own course to conquer. So that's where my poetry started, was those two in the spot. And it's quite funny, when I got this out of the bookcase yesterday, I found the original Writers' Festival brochure, and I looked in it, and there's a whole lot of photos in here, and all the speakers, including Joe over back there. But it's quite funny because at the time I was going, wow, these people have got it made. These guys are real writers. And now I look through them, I go, yeah, I know him. So it's really exciting to be speaking at the Writers' Festival. I remember, well, poetry to me, when I write poetry like this, these poems were fiction. Some people argue poetry should be truth, but I think it's a good way of condensing fiction down into its most simple terms. That's why I like poetry. And the Writers' Festival, there were 3 things at that Writers' Festival. The first was seeing my poetry published for the first time. The second was right here, right in this spot, was a workshop with Owen Marshall, a very famous author, and he took us through some of his tricks of the trade. Now, to get that for free, that was pretty special because I learned a lot from him that morning. I learned ways of speaking, of writing dialogue and speech, and getting the thoughts of a character on the page. It was also when I first discovered the power of writing, because I remember we had to do an exercise. We had to write a few paragraphs of something. And it was, I wrote one that featured the death of a stillborn child. And I read it out to the class, and Marshall commented a few things. And as I went to leave, this elderly lady came to me and she said, that story, she said, you've been through exactly what I've been through. She said, that was very powerful to me. And I didn't have the heart to tell her, well, I just made that up. But to her, that was powerful. And I think that's, the power of writing is what you write, even if it's fiction, will mean something to somebody else. So, yeah, it's a very powerful and motivating thought. Also, that Writers' Festival, that first Writers' Festival, was the first time I got to perform my poetry in public, because down at Murray's Pub they had a poetry evening. And they became a little bit legendary after that. I performed with Rachel Doré and Chris Gallivan and a guy called Paul Turner, who is a musician. Now, Chris and Paul and I now have a little troupe, a trio called the Rouseabouts. And we like to go around a few woolsheds and a few cafes, or whoever will have us really, and perform our poetry. Now, I do my originals. Chris, he always, he's amazing. He can remember hundreds, maybe even thousands of poems. And he's got them, just can speak them, no notes or anything. He's a fantastic guy. And he's really keeping the New Zealand poetry, keeping the thought of New Zealand poetry alive. And I think that's very special that we can do that. And that all came down to that first Writers' Festival. So, actually, it just reminds me, I better turn my phone off. This is how professional I am. Because we don't want the bank manager to know this. So I'll just turn that off. 2017 it was, yeah. Now, what else have I got here? If you saw Country Calendar the other day, you will have heard me recite my poem about Murray Ball. Yeah, now that was published in The Listener a few years ago. And everybody my age, every farmer my age, we grew up with thoroughflags, and it was a bit of an inspiration to us, and everybody knew it. It was back when everybody knew a farmer back then. And so I'll just recite it to you now. I'll read it to you now. They say you went away, mate, and left the dog to us. Packed up all your pencils and went without a fuss. We'll take good care of him, mate, until there comes a time the big man stands and whistles, dog, get in behind. So goodbye, Murray Ball, mate, the world won't be the same. You could have had the decency to tell us the damn dog's name. Yeah, goodbye, Murray Ball, mate, and thanks for all the laughs. You may be gone, but we'll stay on with Wall and Dog in our hearts. So that got a lot of good feedback on TV just recently. I think that really touched the nerve with everybody. But Country Calendar was that was an experience. That was set up by my publisher, Alan and Alan, who published This Fun Life. They set up all the media stuff with us, and yeah, they rang me on a Saturday and said, "What day can we come out and film this week?" That's how much time I got. Yeah. So I put them off. I said, "Well, Thursday would be good." They said, "We need 4 days." Maybe 6, they said. So Thursday, I said, "Okay, you can do Thursday." Now, they duly arrived on Thursday, and they had maize to harvest, and they had a few other things. Now, the thing is, they turn up with one camera, one sound engineer, and a director. And because I've only got one camera and they want to do different shots all the time,
So nodding.
yeah, you have to sort of do everything 3, 4, 5 times. You have to walk like this. You have to go. And then I'll say, no, right back and do it, and they'll set up the camera again. Now that's fine when it's people. But when you've got sheep coming down the track, and the dog is behind them, and you've got this big mob of sheep coming down the track, and you've got a little walkie-talkie, and they go, yep, that's great, turn them around and take them back again, we'll do it again. Okay, right. Whistle the dog, got the sheep back again. All right, here we go. Drone's overhead now. Run the sheep down there. Yeah. All right, yeah, no, that's good. Cut. Do it again. 5 times these sheep coming down the track. The dog stopped. Stop. Okay, that'll do, Sam. And he gave me this look. I went, what are you doing? And he said, I'm not doing that again. And he just took them right down to the yards. Oh, Sam. The camera crew's going, no, you get some. No, it's good. It's quite funny too because we did a scene with the cattle, and the cattle were a little bit towy that day, and we were having trouble getting them through the gates. Oh, get in there. Oh, there we go. Get them in. And the director, she's a lady, and she says, I'll give you a hand. And she comes in, she runs into the yards. Now, the thing with cattle is they get used to people, they know faces and they know people. And if it's a stranger, they don't really like it. So she gets in, and the next thing, this bullock, he's got his head down, and he's gone for it. He's gone, and she's running across, she jumps the fence, up over the top there. So, oh, no. I said, you get that? Can we do it again? Yeah.
Did she?
No. So it was very interesting though doing country calendar because it's something we've all grown up with, and it was nice to see it, but it was very rushed. We had no warning on what they wanted to talk about or anything like that. So when you're doing some work, you're pressing wall or you're doing drafting or something like that, and the next thing they've got the camera and the microphone, and they go, what do you like about sheep? And at that stage you go, not a lot. Yeah, so, but it was fun, and it came out really well. I'm quite happy with it. Yeah, I was a bit worried, but yeah, it's online. Yeah, it's on TVNZ on demand. It's also on YouTube. I see. So, yeah, so
It's only a couple of weekends.
yeah, it was not last night, the week before.
Coming out on the DVD, won't it?
Well, hopefully, yeah, hopefully it'll come out on DVD. Yeah. They wanted to actually come back in August because it was filmed at the start of June, straight after lockdown. Because what happened was over lockdown, they weren't able to produce any shows, and they were getting short of shows to watch. So they did everything very, very quickly, and so they did it at the start of June. We did have a slight issue because they wanted to put it on earlier, and my publisher said, "Well, you can't put it on before the book comes out." So they had a few issues about that, but it all worked out in the end. And then we had 7 Sharp arrive, and that was completely different. That was one camera person and the reporter, Julian Lee, and they were so laid back. Country Calendar was like, right, we've got to get this shot, got to get that shot, do this, But Julian was he was more interested. It was just after that, there was an explosion, I think in Beirut, was it? Yeah. And he started talking to Dad. Now this is my father. Started talking to Dad on how to make a bomb out of fertilizer. I'm going, Dad, don't talk about that. They've got the camera going. And he's going, yeah, well, what you need is some super here and some diesel in here. But yeah, that was a nice experience doing 7 Sharp. And you might not have seen it, they did these amazing shots with the drone. and the woolshed just looked like a model. And the whole farm just looked, it was a really nice thing. So I'm pretty happy with the way those things have turned out. And, it's also really interesting to see, like everyone said, don't look at things online, don't look at comments or anything like that, because that's where all the cesspit of humanity is. But I did, and it's been mostly positive stuff. And
It's nice to see something local.
yeah, yeah, and I think I've had a lot of feedback about that. A lot of people like to see local things because we do miss it. And but I mean, we've got this, like I said, Writers' Festival and the libraries doing events all the time. We're quite lucky to have facilities like this. So I remember to tell the council. Yeah, for a pay rise. So after the Writers' Festival, I kept writing, and I wrote a short story called Walk to Work, and I thought, well, that's pretty good. I like the way it turned out. And I sent it into Mind Food magazine, which is one of the big magazines, national magazines, and they had a short story competition. And it got picked for the January issue. And then all 12 stories were judged at the end of the year by a panel of judges. And mine won the overall competition. So I was really happy with that. And one of the judges, Paula Morris was one, she's a great novelist. But another was Jenny Helen from Allen and Unwin. And she rang me. And she said, I hope you don't mind me ringing you, but your short story is some of the best writing I have seen for a long time. It's head and shoulders above anything I've read. And she sees a lot. And she asked me, do you think you've got a book in you? I said, no. I've written a few things so far. And I said, what would you be after? Would you be after maybe... would you be after short stories or a book of poetry? She said, well, no, you're a farmer. It'd be interesting to have a well-written book about farming. There's a real gap in the market about that, for that at the moment. And I said, well, I'll give it a go. I write everything in longhand. That's how I do my first draft, is to write in longhand, simply because I get a good flow. And the beauty with that is when I do my second draft, I'm typing it. So that's the second draft done. And then it's just a process of finishing it off. But that's how the book came about. So I was asked by Allen and Unwin to give it a go. So I gave it a go, and first thing I wrote, I'll just read it to you. Thank you. I'll read, you clear your throat. This is our farm, 390 hectares of flat land, plonked smack bang in the middle of the Manawatu. The Arua River snakes its way from the foothills of the Taurua Ranges, which it doesn't. I made a mistake. I own up to it. Yes. Through the township of Fielding and eventually feeds into the Manawatu River before reaching the Tasman Sea. To the west of the farm is Saunders Road, named after my family, and beyond that the neighbouring farms sweep to the coast. Mount Ruapehu thumbs a ride on the horizon to the north. To the south, well, it's usually raining to the south. The Tararua and Ruahine mountain ranges are smeared along the eastern horizon. They form the central spine of the legendary fish pulled, heaving and flapping from the bottom of the ocean by Maui. The ranges divide the east and west of the North Island. Black and blue rain clouds pound their slopes like meteorological bruises. The ranges also provide a useful barometer. If you can see them, it's going to rain, laughs Dad. If you can't see them, it is raining. My sister, Darren, lives with her family near Blenheim, but she still has an active interest in the farm. One of her sons, my nephew Daniel, recently spent a year working here. He's actually back now. A chef by training, he gained a new respect for animals through his time on the farm. There'll be no food wastage in his kitchen. I watched Dad as he gazed over the paddocks, the grazing animals, the scattered trees. I wondered if we saw the same thing, something deeper than dirt and work and animal shit. Spread out in front of us was history, future, a family life, a farming life, a name to live up to, a person to become, a place to belong. So that's where I started. That's the thought that started me on this book. Now, while I was writing this, I kind of just kept writing short stories and poetry at the same time, so I had a lot of different things going on. I remember I wrote a poem at one stage called A Question of Art. Now this was me trying to write a poem not to do with farming. We uncovered the lost fountain of uselessness on Cuba Street, where coloured buckets chuck brackish water at each other, and it is a prerequisite of baristas to wear beards like Edwardian cricketers. Their caffeine stares pour round stains on tables, reminders of conversations caught in transit over organic Cuban fair trade coffee. We speak of obesity in children, plastic on beaches, the unswimmability of rivers, while you study drinks as they spread like the dark marks on your arm. Your chipped cup leaves the bitter black bruise of an unspoken circle, and we return to the unsuitability of buckets, the question of art, and unbroken rings on tables. So that I sent off, and that was published in Turbine, which is one stands away from there, which publish things. That's a good explanation. But as I said, I carry a notebook, so a lot of these stanzas, a lot of these lines, I write in my notebook, which is here. This is actually one I got from the last Writers' Festival. Yeah, the pen too. So everything, I just write down lines and parts of poems as I'm driving around the farm, as I'm tractor driving, as I'm getting the sheep up for Dad. And these usually turn into something, somewhere along the line. I just said here, last night I wrote, the silent anticipation of stars as the moon drags its fingernail across the blackboard night. That'll turn into something at some stage. So it's all about being a magpie. And my actual writing day, because it's very important to have some discipline when you're writing, so I write from 6 till 9 in the morning. I get up, I write from 6 till 9, and then go out on the farm and join everybody else. Usually my brother's up and about by then, and my partner Catherine, she works on the farm. And the trouble is, even if you're sitting there writing something, there's always a distraction. These days, it's emails or banks trying to get hold of you or everything like that. So there's always a distraction, but it's really important to try and sit down and do that. I'll read you a little bit about distractions from the book. I left Dad lost in thought on the riverbank, headed home to do some office work. More and more time is spent in the office doing paperwork these days, time that should be spent outside getting stuff done. Piles of forms were strewn randomly across the office, all demanding immediate attention. Compliance is the catchphrase these days. Farmers must be compliant or face the consequences. Whether it is the bank, the IRD, NATE, Health and Safety, the Regional Council, the District Council, NZ-GAP, Farm Quality Assurance, the insurance companies, Statistics New Zealand and their bloody surveys, they all want a piece of my time. And when the pressure is on to get the sheep shorn, cattle tagged, crops planted, sheep drenched, crops harvested, fences fixed, bales shifted, lambs tagged, cattle fed, the roof fixed, lambs stocked, ewes moved and paddocks cultivated, the paperwork tends to mount up on every flat surface. A pile of forms towered in the corner. Spiders had converted it to a high-rise apartment building. I didn't have the heart to make them homeless. Dad used to do all of the paperwork, but he gave up when we got a computer. Dad doesn't do computers. The bank wants to know how many sheep we've got, I said to Mark. He'd finished ploughing. His tractor sat next to the wool shed, ready for the next job. Why? I don't know, because they're bored. I tapped at the computer a few times like a cat playing with a mouse. Well, we're currently running about 750 breeding ewes, he said. I typed the figure into the email. The cursor blinked impatiently. And we've just sold 200 trading lambs and bought 300, which I reckon gives us around 1,500 fattening lambs on the farm at the moment, and 210 cattle, although we've got some fat ones to sell. The office was at the far end of the sprawling homestead where I grew up. Mum and Dad still called it home. Mark and I live in cottages at either end of the farm now. The office used to be my bedroom. Remnants of stickers and graffiti still scar the door. Dad converted the room into an office when I moved out. Mark and I shared the bedroom when we were really small. He used to tell me stories in the dark about his exciting adventures in space. It wasn't until I was older I realised he was just quoting Star Wars. He wants to know about the crops too, I said. Okay, let's see. Maize, about 30 hectares of that, and 50 hectares of wheat, maybe some barley, and we'll put in a paddock of sweet corn. That always grows well here. We don't have to spray it too much, which is always good. Write down peas, but I'm not sure yet. Those are the main crops. Or does he want to know about feed crops to fatten lambs as well? I shrugged. The sudden trill of my cell phone scared the cat from his hiding place under last year's accounts. Hello? Dad's voice barked down the line like an old dog worrying sheep. Are you going to get that hay mown, or is it going to mow itself? I pressed send on the email. Paperwork was done for the day. The spiders had escaped eviction once again. So that's my office job.
It's cool.
That's pretty much how things work. Yeah, I should actually be doing some office work today, but much nicer talking to you people. Got to have a day away from it, don't we?
Yeah, I've got a day away from today too, so that's why.
Oh, fair enough.
I've got an email, text or email in the end and then not answering.
Oh, yeah, fair enough. I've got plenty of those. The other thing I was doing when I was writing short stories, poetry and the book was I started writing flash fiction. Now, flash fiction is, well, the way I write it is a complete story under 300 words. And that's harder than what you think. But the first year I tried, I sent 3 stories in and I got one long-listed in the National Flash Fiction Awards, and I was very excited about that. So the second year, I sent 3 stories in, they were all shortlisted, and I actually came 3rd in the national finals for that, for Flash Fiction Awards. And I was also won the Central District's Regional Awards, so I was quite happy with that. And then this year I did exactly the same, got exactly the same placings. So I got 3rd overall Central District's Award, and it was just really nice. It's taught me quite a few things about writing, doing flash fiction. It's all about choosing the right word, because you don't have very many words to choose from, so you've got to choose that right word. And you've really got to strip all the components of a story right down to their very basic level. It's just got to be what's needed. And a lot of it's left up to the imagination of the reader. You just sort of getting them to where you want them. It's a bit like getting sheep into the paddock. You just got to put the dog around, just get them going in the right direction. It's taught me a lot. I always think about it like remember those dolls that all fitted one into each other? It's a bit like that. You've got a story, a short story. And then in that, part of that short story, you've got flash fiction, because you can concentrate on one part of that short story. You can concentrate on one thing. So that's the next one down. And you can keep condensing that right down to the title. The title is very important in flash fiction. Everything's got to be there for a reason. Give you an example. The first year I came third, I had one called T is for Tiger. The reason I called it T is for Tiger was because tiger is a very important metaphor and image in the story, but also T is for Tiger makes you realise straight away it's from the perspective of the child. So I'll just read it to you because these are very short. T is for Tiger. Abort! Abort! The spaceman reaches out a gloved hand to push the big red button. I love this show. There's a lot of yelling, my sister's big hair flying, the staccato clatter of slamming doors, the clutter of words in the hall. I'm 7 when Madonna releases Like a Virgin. I have no idea what a virgin is, but it's cool. I want to be like one too. There's a video of her on canal boats with a lion. I like lions, but I like tigers more. I have a tiger on my bed. He has red eyes. Then Weird Al Yankovic sings Like a Surgeon, and it's funny. Cut for the very first time. Ha ha. Mum screams at my sister. Dad reads the paper, but his hands are shaking. He scrunches it. I was born on May 20th, 1977. The first letter of my name is T. T is the 20th letter in the alphabet. Makes it easy to remember my birthday. T also stands for Taurus. Taurus people have an eye for beauty. Mum calls her a slut. There's a headline on Dad's newspaper about Roger Douglas. He's in the news all the time, talking about adopting change, accepting development. My sister stays in her room. I think she's beautiful. I have an eye for these things. T is the second most common letter in the English language. It's the most common consonant. Without it, the spaceman would just say abort, abort. It doesn't have the same effect. Mum and Dad whisper in the kitchen. I hear the newspaper rustle and knuckled fists. They want to know who the father is. They talk about virgins, surgeons, adoption, change, can't keep it, abort, abort. T is for tiger. His eyes are red buttons. Yeah. So that's flash fiction. That's sort of taking a very big idea and condensing it down into one single moment. I wrote that from the perspective of the child, and that was very important because we've all been kids, we've all been children at some stage, so we know how children think and how we used to talk. We know that, and I incorporated that. After doing that story, I thought, well, it's quite a nice narrative. It's quite a nice way of talking and getting an idea across, because as a child you see things differently, and I decided to incorporate that in this farming life. So parts of this book I've written from my perspective as a 7-year-old child, growing up and going to Glenroy School, and how I've tried to convey how that's affected the way I see things now. Give you an example. I'll read you part of this. Where's the bank manager?
It's country calendar.
Yeah, they want to do a sequel.
It's somebody's phone. It's been left here. Oh.
Somebody's lost
Somebody's probably trying to ring it to find out where it is.
it. Yeah.
There's a lot on the floor.
I'm surprised
Lost-
there was a
lost
couple
property.
sitting there before it was still
And answer is like, who are you?
Yeah. Bring them back.
There's a story.
Yeah. Why not? You can find stories everywhere. It's,
You can make one up off that history quite quickly, won't it?
yeah.
All these desperate people try to avoid their phones and those ones have lost it.
Yeah. We were running a workshop, we'd work with that. But yeah, so I wrote part of it from the perspective of the child. Now this is my voice as a child. I sit behind Dad on the motorbike. It's the weekend, no school, and I'm allowed to go around lambs with him. I grip handfuls of his jersey so I won't fall off, breathe in the thick smell of the wool. The wind whips over my head if I hunker down low enough. My woolly hat keeps slipping down over my eyes. We stop in the gateway of Nana's paddock. I push my hat back into place and hop down from the bike, careful not to burn myself on the manifold. Steam curls as mud cools the engine. I swing the gate open. It catches on a knob of dirt and I have to push it harder. Dad's staring across the paddock of sheep. A set of twin lambs feed off their mum along the fence line, one on each side. They press their noses up under her roughly. They go berserk as they desperately look for milk. What are you looking at? I asked. Dad nods his head towards the far side of the paddock. A group of seagulls turn circles in the air, wheeling their wide wings and defying the confines of gravity. I can hear them as they scream murder at the westerly that sweeps in from the ocean. There's trouble over there, says Dad. You can always tell if there's a sick lamb or dead lamb in the paddock. The seagulls are attracted to it. The trick is to get there first. I whirl myself up onto the sheltered spot behind him, and we roar towards the circling gulls. Everything goes black as my hat slips down yet again. I carry that on just here. I cling to the motorbike seat behind Dad. This is heaps better than school. Gulls squawk and panic as we roar through them. They spread their wide wings and fan out into the sky. The air is filled with noise and black and white feathers. We skid to a stop. I love it when we skid. Dad squeezes the brake, the wheels lock up and we slide through the mud. There's that joyful feeling of being out of control for a few seconds. It's fun, not dangerous, especially when Dad does it. Dad's not smiling. He jumps off the bike and runs to a yellow smudge in the grass. I take a bit longer to clamber down off the bike. My gumboots squish through the mud. They stick. I have to pull them out with my legs. Maybe I'll have to abandon them like an old car and walk in my socks. I wonder if it is quicksand, like on TV. Dad might turn around and I'll be gone, sucked down into the bowels of the earth. Dad's kneeling by the thin yellow smear of a lamb lying in the mud. It's covered in slime. Dad wipes the snot from his face with his big hand. Then he wipes his hand on his jeans. Gross. Steam curls up from the tiny body. Bloody thing is not breathing, says Dad. It's only just been born and its mother has buggered off and left it. Hasn't even cleaned it. He taps the lamb's back with his hands, rubs down its spine. Is it dead? I ask. Not if I can help it, he replies. Dad hooks the slime out of the lamb's mouth with his long finger. He flicks stuff out of its nose. His fingers have turned blue in the cold air. He lowers his face down to the lamb's mouth. For a second, I think he's going to kiss it, which would be really weird. But he doesn't kiss it. He doesn't quite touch it with his lips. He blows lightly into the lamb's nose and mouth. I watch its stomach fill with air like a balloon. Dad stops blowing and its belly deflates again. He does it again, blows air down the lamb's throat. I feel the cold wind shush the back of my neck. The seagulls whirl and dance above us, eager for an easy meal. Dad blows again and again. Suddenly, the lamb coughs. Its eyes bulge open. I see its tiny tummy inflate by itself. It's breathing, I cheer. I try to do a happy dance, but my boots are stuck in the mud. Dad thrusts the lamb towards me. It's warm and wet and slippery. Slime slops down the front of my jacket. I feel the movement of air in its lungs. I hold the lamb between me and Dad on the bike as we race home, the seagulls cursing us in the wind. So he does do that, and he taught me to revive lambs like that. It's quite nice to be able to do that. Give them the old kiss of life. But yeah, that's wee Timmy speaking there. Yeah, so it's really important, I think, when writing. One of the most important things is to find the character's voice. I start a lot of stories and I don't get very far. I stop. And then I start them again with a slightly different voice for the character, a slightly different setting, and I stop again. I'm starting and stopping. Right, that's no good, get rid of that. And start, and then suddenly I find a voice, and I find the right setting and the right time, and then from there, I seem to be able to get it to flow. It's a little bit like surfing. Once you've got that wave, you find that wave, you wait long enough, you find it, you ride it into shore. But you've got to be out in the water to catch it. So that's a lot of how I work as a writer. Many of my stories start as poems in my notebook. Many of my stories, I write a poem and I think, well, this sounds good, I can expand on that. And most of my flash fiction is like that. Like The Westerly, which was placed this year in the National Flash Fiction Awards, was pretty much a full poem, which I just tweaked a little bit. You speak of your distaste towards atheists and daylight saving, the driving skills of tourists, and long words like metastasis. I order 2 organic Cuban long blacks, but you say it's too late to go all vegan now. I make yours a flat white instead. Turbines crowd the Tararuas like white crosses scattered over a military graveyard. Their wide arms crucify the westerly wind as it spreads wild and free up the ranges on its way to wherever the westerly goes. I wonder idly how it knows when it gets there, or if it has a final resting place in mind. Perhaps the ultimate destiny of the westerly is just to blow, its existence dictated by the journey and not where it's heading. The girl who brings the coffee tells us to have an awesome day, and you laugh as you wrap your diagnosis around your shoulders. You pull it close like a shawl. Then you mention you detest those who confuse drama with trauma, and how you'll miss your sister the most. Maybe you'll miss sunsets too, but not so much. You inspect the dregs as they spread across the bottom of your cup like moss on the south side of Stone Angels. You complain that the cleanliness of antiseptic smells like sickness, and how a 3rd round of chemo will kill you. The westerly catches the scarf on your head, whips it wild and free towards the bare hills. We watch it flutter and twist in the late autumn sun as we consider the gradual shortening of days. So that's the westerly. Yeah, so these are stories that are a long way away from my farming life, but it's a love of writing and a love of making up stories that just really drives me to do things. Another one I can read you is called Last Call. Now, I heard a story about the huia, which is the extinct bird, the huia. Nobody living has ever heard a huia, and there is no recording of a huia. The only reason we know what a huia sounds like is from a man who did hear one, and in the late 40s or 50s, they made a recording of him imitating a huia. And that's the only reason we know what sound the huia made. And I listened to that recording, and it had an old radio. I don't think it was Radio New Zealand back then, but it was the national radio man with the very English voice announcing it. And then it had this other man doing the call, and I took a lot of what the original announcer said, and I incorporated it into Last Call. Let us imagine two birds are feeding on a rotten tree. Let us imagine the descending cadence of decadent notes as they hook curved beaks into decaying bark, their ivory-tipped tails mimicking slivers of silver light. Let us imagine my father's voice occupies the air, except it is not my father's voice. My sister presses record on the tape deck again, and I speak as accents and inflections into the microphone as the black ribbon whirs and spools. Its tight black circles like the stain of a coffee cup ingrained in the table. I have become an expert at imitating my father's call, ensnaring his intonations and tempos. We play it back, and for a moment I feel my feet swaddled in his large steps, his grey speckled stubble scattered like stars. Let us imagine it is my father's words that flutter from the speakers, not just feathers at the window. The crackle of my voice inhabits his. Let us imagine he is here. Let us imagine the huia had not climbed to the top of a tree and glided into the distance. For a moment, pretend one scratches in the leaves outside your window and calls for its mate. The notes swoop into your room as you pluck them from the air and wrap them in flax leaves. Bury them with the hot rocks of your heart. Let us imagine the only memory of their song is not just the recording of a man whistling. I clear my throat like native bush, stumble over words as if they are the thick roots of harakiki. My father's waiata is extinct. That is me you hear singing. That is me you hear singing. Let us imagine him singing. So that actually came third this year, so I'm very proud of that. And yeah, so that's flash fiction. Just drink water. So all the time I was writing poetry, flash fiction, and short stories, I was working on a book. I actually wrote, this is about 70,000 words, which is what they wanted. I actually wrote twice that much, and I discarded most of it. And I thought, well, that's good, I've got a sequel written already. But when I read it back, there's a reason why I discarded it. It's rubbish. So I don't think I'll use any of that. Yeah, editing that down to shape is a big process. As I was writing this, and I'd done flash fiction, I was part of the Flash Fiction Awards down in Wellington, and I was doing a panel and doing some readings, and I didn't realise there was a Radio New Zealand producer in the audience. And I got a phone call a while later from Jesse Mulligan, who does the project and has his afternoon show on Radio New Zealand, and he really wanted to talk to me about my writing. So I went on Radio New Zealand, and I talked to Jesse. We talked about writing, we talked about music and books, and I did a wee book review on some of my favourite books. And one of the books that I talked about was Henry Moore's Sheep Sketchbook, which I brought along today. Now, Henry Moore was a sculptor, did a lot of sculpture work. And yeah,
Or a Henry Moore sculpture.
yeah, and what he did was in 1972, he was getting ready to take all his sculptures to an exhibition in France. So he cleared them all out of his studio, and he sat there in a bare studio with his desk. And for the first time, he looked out the window with nothing around him, and he saw sheep. And he started sketching these sheep. And to begin with, he was just sketching nothing more really than just balls of wool. And as he went along, and this is in chronological order, as he went along, he actually started to capture the essence of sheep. And he started to see the form under their wool. And to get the life of them, there's a lot of pictures in here of ewes and their lambs. Now the thing with Henry Moore is he had a theme that went right through his work. He always had something large sheltering something small. And that's what he started to do with these sketches of sheep. Now, it became, some of these, you really get a feeling of almost biblical mother and child type feeling with this book. And I was telling Jesse Mulligan about this. And Jesse actually said it was the greatest book review he'd ever heard, and he was going to go out and get it. But the book itself, well, that is fantastic. The book itself, this book was recommended to me by John Clark. It was Fred Dagg. Now, I knew John quite well. We used to email a lot. And it started when I sent him a fan letter, just a fan email once. And he found out that I lived near Rangitea. And of course, first thing he said was, "How's Te Kawa doing?" Which is the rugby team there. And so whenever we were writing, he always wanted to know how Te Kawa was doing. And he used to send me DVDs and things, and he'd always have "Oh, Te Kawa" scrawled across the front of them. But John was a really nice guy. And we used to just write funny things to each other and have each other on. And he always had time for people. And he actually told me about this. He said, you'd love this, because he knew I was on a sheep farm. He said, this really made me think and have a different view of sheep. I remember I asked John once, I said, have you got some advice for my writing? He said, I'll give you the piece of advice my mother gave me. It's the best piece of advice I've ever had. Never run with scissors. So that was John 13. And I just really love this book. It's really worth looking for it. Of course, being on a farm, I see these things every day with the sheep. I'll tell you a little bit about the farm. How are we going for time? The farm, my farm is was purchased by my great-great-grandfather, W.J. Saunders, in 1906. Before that, the land was all owned by a guy called Isaac Greenway. And he wanted to make the little settlement of Glenarua a big township. And so he had it all set up, he had the plans and everything. But part of our farm, the boundary is the Orobo, and it used to flood, it still floods. But it was flooding so much, all of that ground that he wanted to make into a town was always flooded. So Isaac Greenaway gave up on the idea, went to Australia and left the land to be sold. Now my great-great-grandfather, W.J. Saunders, he was born here. His parents came over on the London in 1842. But W.J. William Joseph, he went gold mining down on the west coast. Now, the story goes that one day he was at the pub, as we go, and they had a competition. They had this massive block of gold. Can't have been a nugget, because I know for a fact the nugget, the biggest nugget was only 3 kgs, but it was a big block. It was 500 pounds. And the idea was, anybody that could tie a rope around this nugget, put the rope around their neck, and lift it up, would win 500 pounds in cash, which was a fortune. But nobody could do it until my great-great-grandfather came along. And I talk about this in my book, But and my father said, mate, it would sound like a cowboy coming to town with his 6 shooters. And I said, well, you've got to have a little bit of romance, don't you? But WJ put this thing up, he picked it up, he lifted it, and he actually walked across the floor with it, which nobody else was able to do. And they gave him the £500, and from that he was able to come up here and he purchased land over in Alfreton behind Ekatahuna. And there's a Saunders road over there. And he used that money not just to buy that, but to buy a whole lot of blocks, and he bought one here in Glenaroa, which is our farm now, in 1906. So that's how long we've been on the farm. Now it's a big responsibility to take on a 5th generation farm. There's a responsibility to the land, there's a responsibility to the environment, and there's also a responsibility to the family name. And nobody wants to be that person that drops the ball and things go wrong. So it is a big responsibility to take over the land. And I talk about this in my book. I never really wanted to go farming. When I left school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. The world was a big, exciting place, so I decided, well, I'll go out and have a look around. I actually went guiding. Well, after leaving school, I went to university at Massey, studied applied science, just so I could put off making a decision of what to do. Then I went and studied TV and film at Avalon Studios. Didn't get the work in TV and film that I wanted to get. I wanted more drama, writing type things, and all I got stuck on was doing the trackside TAB camera work with the horses going around and around. So I threw caution to the wind and I answered an advert to go down to Te Anau in Fiordland, and I became a cave guide. I'd never been in a cave before. Didn't even know where Te Anau was, really. Oh, how hard can that be? So I went down there and I loved it, and I still love Te Anau. And I stayed there for a few years until I got a bit bored with being underground all the time. And I started driving for Flying Kiwi, doing tours right around the country in a big bus, 30 people, sole driver and guide. And I actually met my partner, Catherine, on one of those trips. She's German. And when my contract finished doing these trips, I went to Germany for a few years and lived with Catherine. And when I ran out of visas, there was this sort of calling, want a better word, a voice in the back of my head saying, wide open spaces, come home to the farm. So we did. We've been back on the farm for 12 or 13 years now. And Catherine's a vegetarian, living on a sheep and beef farm. Now, she always says to me, she says, well, I'm never going to change how people view meat. I'm never going to change or stop people from eating meat. But what I can do is make people more aware of quality over quantity and issues like that. So we're pretty passionate actually about meat production. I've written some notes which I'd just like to share with you about my thoughts. Now I find it fascinating that somebody somewhere is eating something that I produce. Now that could be meat, or it could be something to do with the grain or vegetables that I grow. I produce food. But with meat, that's something I grew or something I raised, and it's something I gave life to. Now that in itself is a pretty powerful and motivating thought. But that can lead to a certain amount of inner conflict. As a farmer, I give life, but I also take it away. And that's all in the name of food production. And yeah, like I said, that's a huge responsibility. Now, massive amounts of food are wasted all the time. And that's worldwide, and that happens at every level. That happens in the supermarkets, in restaurants, in the household. And I think part of that problem comes from being disconnected to where our food comes from. Now, I grew up around animals. I ate meat, and I still do, most nights of the week. I've cut down the amount of meat that I eat now, but we still eat meat. As kids, we grew most of our vegetables. I still do have a big vegetable garden in the back road. And that gave me a respect for food. These are living creatures that we're eating. These are sentient beings. They're not just a word on a menu or something on an ingredient list. By reducing animals to words such as beef or tender or hamburger, you're actually stripping it of its identity. And I really believe that we're in a unique position in this country, that we can produce ethically raised food. Food that's free range and grass fed. And that is our strong point. But as consumers, two of us, it's important that we're mindful of where that food comes from and what we're eating. That we give it the respect that it deserves. So I'm around these animals every day that we're farming. I see the life in them. I'm aware of the processes of water and weather that grow the crops and grass and give life. Millions of years of processes that have gone into the land that we walk on. And the thought that meat may be wasted, that actually makes me quite sad. And I think we need that mindfulness and that sense of connection and that respect for what we eat. And that's the aim of my book, is to try and bring back those ideas back into how we think and into how we eat. So don't go wasting food. But the land itself is the same land my great-great-grandfather walked on. I'm literally walking in his footsteps. And I produce a lot of wool, which isn't worth much anymore. I don't even make enough to pay the shearers. And I think that's a real shame. And I think natural fibres, we need to think a lot more about. I've got one too. Yeah. And because I just sold some wool and I got $1 a kilo for it. And that's nothing. So I think we need to think about insulation. We need to think about adding value to wool. Catherine, actually, my partner Catherine, she's thinking of adding value and thinking in different ways, because she's found out in Germany, some of our wool goes to Germany, gets made into felt, which gets made into a whole lot of different things, which are then shipped back to here. Maybe we should be thinking of, somehow adding. We used to sell the Feltex and things like that, and it's just not there anymore. So I think that's a real shame, and it's I've got a lot of black wool at home that I can't do anything with. So if you know any spinners or anybody that does wool spinning, let me know. Yeah, I've got tons of stuff that I can't get rid of. But it's farming's getting tougher. I mean, we've got the issue with the pine trees at the moment. A lot of the country's getting taken up by pine trees, and they'll tell you that's unproductive land, and I can tell you right now it's not. That land that they're growing the trees on is, some of it is in the top 5% producing farms. Yeah. Oh, they're everywhere, and it's really causing problems for our rural communities. It's a huge problem, and when you think about the reason that they're growing pine trees, and they're saying, well, it's to for carbon offsetting.
Soak up.
Yeah, to soak up carbon. it's overseas investors that are buying the land for these trees. They're still producing as much carbon as they like and as much pollution as they like in their own country, and they're using us as a dumping ground. So to me, that's a real shame, and that's one of the issues that we're facing, especially now. I think there's a rule coming out that I heard the other day, inland over 10 degrees, which is a very slight slope, they can force them to grow trees on it.
Meanwhile, we've seen 5,800 cows in the bottom of the sea.
And that's terrible. That's terrible. I'm totally against live shipments, I always have been. And
Giving another country to actually read your
exactly.
Why would you do that?
At the very basic, as well as it being, I don't think it's very humane to be
I think
taking
it's
them like that.
seriously.
Yeah, I agree with you there. But if you even look at it from the economic point of view, we're giving our breeding stock to other countries.
They don't have to buy our meat.
So there's so many things wrong with live shipments that I think it should be stopped. Yeah, and I think we've really got to, whoever's in power in all of this, we've really got to petition that to stop that. Because I understood it was going to be stopped under this government. But I think there's a lot of, sorry?
They've got a whole bunch already in quarantine and they reckon they can't send them back. But what happened to the farms that were stripped of cows by Ebolas? Needing to stop what's recycling tree.
Yeah, trees. This is all part of the it's really, farming is at a very low point at the moment.
Yeah.
I
They
think,
send the sheep over there and then send it back to us because that's what we're paying for them.
yeah,
I saw a legal lamb for $56 the other day.
exactly. And that's another of them. I mean,
We can't afford to buy our own meat.
no,
We can't afford to buy your meat.
no, and I can't afford to buy my meat. Because I don't get paid $50 a leg of lamb, like 4 legs on the sheep, and I don't get paid that
I'll
much.
change your conversation here. We're all into a little warm.
Yeah,
It's like you say, they send the wool over and bring it
Yeah.
back. Maybe they send the lamb over there and
Yeah.
bring it back.
yeah. So yeah, somebody somewhere is making money, and it's not me. But yeah, that's
Buy meat, and so we're not getting it either. So somebody's getting it.
no, it is a shame because I think that we should be supporting our own farmers. We should be. We know where our food comes from. We've got to keep our food, pure. And the only way we can do that is to be able to buy it. And if it's outpriced, we can't do that. So there's a lot of things wrong with farming at the moment. But I think we're trying to get it on track. And I talk about that in my book here. How are we going for time? Almost finished. Look at that. That's good. I just talk all day. I'll read you a little poem just to finish off with now. A poem that actually appears, been published quite a bit in the last year or so. Takahe and Landfall. And then this one, the Poetry Museum yearbook. And I have to find it because I certainly don't actually write down.
You're just sending things away on this one.
I'm sending stuff away all the time.
Yes.
And the thing with that is,
Yeah.
a lot of it gets sent back.
Oh.
Good stuff.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter, like, if you're writing stuff and they're sending it back, just keep doing it. Because
Do you send it again somewhere else? that
I
they-
do,
yeah,
and actually this
yeah.
poem that I'm about to read, it's probably easier to read it out of this one. I sent this poem to quite a few publications, including Takahe, including Landfall, and none of them wanted it. But Poetry Museum yearbook did. So it just comes down to the editor. That's what we're doing. We send it out and believe in what we do. So this is called Hills. Wherever you farm, you can see the hills from your south-facing window, crammed within parentheses on the horizon. From your feathered sill, you hear magpies in their onomatopoeia. Your father's cavernous snores and a sheep coughing under macrocarpus. Breathe fresh mist on the glass and follow the spine of the fish with your finger, a punch-drunk, slap-happy line along quake-raised mountains. Notice him watching from the Totara post, Kahu, and his carcass breath, a silent space between violent words. Hold his blood-preened gaze, wrap your heart in flax and bury it with rocks for warmth. Kneel at your stained glass window and remember, to understand love, first you must never have known. So, have we got any other questions about my book or about poetry or anything like that? Anything you'd like to know?
What are you working on now?
What am I working on now? I finished, well, I was meant to be making notes for this talk today. I actually finished a short story, which I thought was quite good. So, like I said, most short stories I don't finish because I don't have a flow on or something's wrong with it, but I finished this one and I'm quite happy with it.
And where is it gone?
And I don't know, I got to edit it. Editing's a huge thing. Edit. Everything's got to be just taken to bits and put back in. The editing of my book, This Farming Life, it went to an editor, a freelance editor, and I don't think she was really liked farming. She was very anti a lot of what was in it. But in saying that, when I did what she said, and in the end, at first I was fighting it all the way. I was going, no, I'm not going to take that out. I'm not going to change that. This is how I wrote it. But then you start to think, all right, I'll try. Such a good. They know what they're doing. That's why they do it. And so the book I've got now, the way she edited it is just, I learned so much. So editing all your work and getting someone else to edit it for you is quite nerve-wracking, but it's the only way to go.
I was going to ask you on that, if you're working with someone like Alan Nunn, when you're a publisher, is, do you think the essence of a rural perspective has remained with your book in the way perhaps you and other of the paddock poets, etc. Do they really speak to Queen Street or to Courtney Place?
I've read a few reviews and people say it's a book that puts them. Somebody said it puts them on the back of the quad bike with them, and I think, and I've said it doesn't matter. Like I read one yesterday, which was written by a vegetarian. She said it doesn't matter if you're a vegetarian townie like me or a farmer. She said this book will appeal to everybody. So somewhere in that middle ground, I've created something that has kept the essence of farming, but it's also appealing to everyone, and that's important.
That's why a lot of us watch Country Calendar.
Yeah, exactly. And you're exactly right.
You've written from the heart.
Yeah, I've written from the heart, and I've written a book about us. And it's really hard, actually, thinking about that. It's very hard to write about yourself and put your family and yourself on the page, because you're kind of thinking, and I said this to my publisher at the time, and she said, write a book about farming. And I said, who's going to want to read that? Who wants to read about my life? My life's not interesting. But to people,
the way you write it.
yeah, and I think it is interesting as well to people who, don't know farming. And I think, yeah, it's quite interesting.
From what you've read, it makes it sound interesting. It sounds like a bit of a rascal, but
Yeah, yeah, my mum will agree with me. Yeah, excellent. Any more questions? Very good. Well, thank you everyone for coming. I've really enjoyed it. I didn't realise I was going to talk for an hour and a half. I was thinking, gee, how am I going to do that? And I only covered half my notes. So, yeah, this is the book. It's available here. Is it? It's still got copies here?
Yeah.
And it's available at Paper Plus, all bookshops. Yes, I can sign them. I'll stick around and I can sign them for you as well.
after listening to the Hunter Hall lady, have you got it in the Hunter Hall bookshop?
It should be. It should be in all bookshops actually. So, and online. So, yeah. Oh, excellent. Thank you.
It's a motorbike.
Have that sort of truth in writing. It's fantastic.
I'll see you later.
Yeah, I think they'll be picked up after today.
You
So,
can get workshops.
yeah. Where's your mum? Is it just that we did?
No, that's just fiction.
That's fiction.
Oh, yeah, on the farm.
Ticking along.
Oh, I was going to do a lot of this writer's fiction.
Yeah. I'm Vicky.
G'day.
Nice to meet you. Can we take you?
Yes.
I said,
Yeah, I just picked them out.
oh, I see.
Oh, yeah, I've already got Kirsty to, she would have, oh, good, yes, good. Yes, awesome. Thanks, Dad.
There you go.
Yeah, so I missed a bit, what are you working on next?
I'm just publicising this, writing short stories and poetry. It's,
Whatever comes up.
yeah.
And with farming in between.
Yeah, it's the same, yeah.
Lambing,
Just finish it. Yeah.
but thank you very much for coming.
Cool, no worries.
Sorry, I wasn't here.
Yeah, no worries. Cool. Yeah,
Gemma.
Good. Oh, Jenna, yes, I know you. I do. Yes. Oh, yeah, no, I like your poetry. Yeah, that's really cool.
Very
Yeah.
much.
Right. Yeah.
I really like the confidence.